Welcome into the live desk. I'm Janae Hancock, joined by Zac Summers. Zac, hey there. Welcome back to the live desk.
Hey, happy, Thursday?
Happy Thursday. I know this week has actually flown by
Yeah,
compared
I know.
to
One day
last
till
week.
tomorrow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I am looking forward to the weekend. I'm sure a lot of people are, but I'm also looking forward to this story that will be airing on KCTV 5 tonight. Pawned off. So a Kansas City woman is actually having some time getting her jewelry back, and it could be due to a state law, or it is due to a state law.
Or the lack thereof.
Yes. So introduce us to Alicia.
Okay.
Introduce us to her and what she's really going through right now.
Yeah, so Alicia reached out to us back in November. It was early November, and she basically says that she was having trouble getting one piece of jewelry back. So back in April, somebody that she trusted got into her jewelry collection, stole about 11 pieces valued at $90,000. And so the police, now this happened in Missouri. The alleged theft happened in Missouri. Police did their investigations, and they were able to track down these pieces, some of them at least, at pawn shops in Johnson County. At three different, I believe it was 2 pawn shops and 1 jewelry store across Johnson County.
Right.
And they weren't able to recover all of the pieces, but there were essentially about 4 pieces available at these different stores. Alicia, she bought back 2. One jewelry store returned one of her diamonds to Overland Park Police, who then returned it to Alicia. But then there's a third pawn shop that is basically holding the jewelry. It's on an investigative hold.
Right.
And Alicia is trying to figure out, well, why can't I get it back? And so she reached out to us, basically like, hey, this is what's happening. It doesn't make sense. Can you all help me understand what's going on, and can you help me get the jewelry back?
Right.
So, I mean, I spent some time, making phone calls to different police departments, to the pawn shops, trying to better understand the situation.
Yeah.
And what we found is Alicia's situation isn't entirely unique because of the way the law is written in Kansas, and the precedent that pawn shops and even law enforcement in some communities go about resolving this problem. So what we found is that no 1-2 entities really follow this process the same, which is why you had Alicia buy back 2 pieces she could afford, another return the jewelry to police, and now you have the one that's on investigative hold inside this third pawn shop.
Which is also why you said it gets murky. It's
exactly,
murky,
and that's where it gets murky, because it's like, well, wait a minute, why don't we have a uniform way to settle this?
Right, yeah.
And so the pawn shop that has the jewelry right now basically gave Alicia 2 options. She could either buy it back, or she can wait and let it play out in the court system.
And at what price is she buying this jewelry back?
So basically she is buying it back at the price that the pawn shop bought it from the person who sold it to them.
Yeah.
And let me just back up, because the pawn shops, the law as it stands now requires them to, when somebody comes in to try to pawn something, they have to show proof of ID.
Right.
And they have to sign an affidavit, basically a written statement, basically acknowledging or saying that they are the rightful owners. The problem is, what happens if they are not the rightful owner?
If it's stolen. Yeah.
And that's where, for the most part, pawn shops in Kansas, now this is just in Kansas,
Right.
they rely on a 1989 opinion from the Kansas Attorney General that basically ruled that pawn shops are due their due process, and that the court system should let it play out. But as we were talking with law enforcement from different areas across Johnson County, they all said the same thing, and we found this to be true, that there is no state statute that governs the return of stolen property, which is why you have this sort of like array of or this range of how things are returned.
A little chaotic.
It
A tad
is.
bit chaotic. And I do want to touch on something that Alicia said, a quote here. It feels like I'm being treated like I did something wrong when in fact I was victimized, burglarized, and violated. So you can just, during your story, you can hear that hurt and that frustration in her voice. And again, she's advocating for other people
Right.
that this may have happened to or could happen to in the future. But you also spoke to Greg Smith. Tell us a little bit more about where he stands.
Yeah, and I, without going into too much detail, because we
Right.
want people to go
Yeah.
watch the story, but you know, Greg Smith works for the Johnson County Sheriff's Office, and he agrees that victims of theft whose belongings end up in pawn shops and they try to get them back, that they're essentially being re-victimized. And so what we were able to find through Greg, actually through looking through the court system, that's how we found Greg, is that he advocated to change Kansas state law so the process of returning stolen property would be uniformed. And so we delve into that proposed law from 2019 that never made it out of committee and why it never made it out of committee. And we also hear from the Kansas Pawnbrokers Association
Yeah.
and the owner of the pawn shop, Mission Pawn, where this story is currently standing. Because, you know, in telling this story, it's not that the pawn shops are doing anything wrong on the Kansas side. It's just the law isn't very clear.
It needs to be figured out.
And
a
in
little bit
talking
more.
with law enforcement, they agree that like the law could be written better.
Yeah.
And it needs to be written better.
Yeah.
So the story kind of highlights a problem.
Yeah.
It lays out the current situation and kind of hints at what needs to happen based on the folks that we spoke with. And you'll be surprised that both Pawnbrokers Association and victims believe that something needs to change
Yeah.
as it relates to Kansas law. And Missouri, and just because we are right here on the border,
Right.
Missouri's law is much more uniformed in terms of getting victims back their rightful material or property, whereas in Kansas it's just, like you said, it's a little murky.
Yeah, and you know, this story actually opens your eyes because it also makes me a little bit curious to see how many people have dealt with this same kind of situation that Alicia is dealing with.
Well,
as
she certainly doesn't believe that she's alone.
Yeah, but just
and
the exact number, or approximately the exact number, it just makes me think about that as well. So, Zach, when does this story air? When can we, or where can we learn a little bit more?
Well,
and
it's
watch
online right now. So if you want to go to KCTV5.com and watch the full story, you can do that right now. It's on the homepage. Otherwise, you can watch it tonight at 10 on KCTV5 News at 10.
As always, Zac Summer here at the live desk. Thank you so much for
It's
joining
Summers with an
me.
S.
Summer.
You were right the first time.
Thank you so much for joining me here at the live desk for Behind the Story.
Thank you.